Hi. Today I'll be keeping you company by telling you a scary story about a young boy hears rumors about Hanako-san, but dismisses them. One evening, he stumbles into the girls' bathroom out of curiosity. When he knocks on the third stall, a cold voice answers, and the door unlocks itself. He panics and runs, but something has followed him home. You'll be shocked by the plot twist. So, make sure your pillow is comfy, put on your earbuds, wrap yourself in a blanket, and welcome to the Urban and Myth Scary Story Podcast, Episode 9, The Unlocked Door. Chapter 1, The Rumor Mill. The whispers spread fast in the corridors of the middle school, like the stale air that lingered in the old building. There were always stories, ghost stories, urban legends meant to scare, but no one took them seriously. No one, except for maybe a few kids with overactive imaginations. That's what Hideo thought, at least. He liked a good scare, but this was just another dumb school myth, he told himself. Hanako-san, the ghost that supposedly haunted the third stall in the girls' bathroom. Knock 3 times, they said, and she'd answer. Hideo had overheard some girls giggling about it near the lockers. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously toward the bathroom at the end of the hallway. It was an old tale, something passed down through generations of students. But now it was making a comeback, the way these stories often did. Hideo didn't buy it. He wasn't the type to fall for ghost stories. He was logical, grounded. Besides, it was just a bathroom. He passed by the door a dozen times a day and never once felt a chill. It was just tile, mirrors, stalls, nothing more. But curiosity is a strange thing. No matter how much he brushed it off, the rumor had planted itself in his mind, gnawing away. That evening, after most of the students had left, Hideo lingered. The hallway was quiet, the kind of silence that made your footsteps seem too loud. His gaze drifted toward the bathroom. He wasn't scared. Not really. But the story, ridiculous as it was, clung to him. His feet moved on their own, carrying him closer to the door. He wasn't sure why he was doing this. Maybe just to prove the others wrong. Maybe just to prove something to himself. As his hand touched the cold metal of the bathroom door, Hideo hesitated for the first time. It was silly, childish, but a small part of him, a very small part, felt something. A presence, maybe? He shook it off and pushed the door open. Chapter 2, The Third Stall. The door creaked as it swung open, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. The bathroom was empty, just as Hideo expected. Pale, flickering lights hummed above, casting long shadows across the room. The mirrors reflected the dull, lifeless glow, and for a moment, everything seemed completely normal, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, something caught his eye. One of the stalls was slightly ajar, the third one, just like in the stories. His heart skipped a beat. He stared at it, the door swaying gently as though it had been touched by a breeze. He didn't want to admit it, but a thin thread of unease tugged at the back of his mind. "It's just a door," he whispered to himself, trying to shake off the creeping feeling in his chest. His breath felt heavier now, and the air around him seemed colder than it had a moment ago. Against his better judgment, Hideo walked closer to the third stall. He had to know, had to prove to himself that it was all just a stupid rumor. He raised his hand, hesitated for only a second, then knocked once. Nothing. He knocked again, his knuckles tapping softly against the wood. Still nothing. Just as he was about to walk away, something happened. A voice, soft, cold, and unnervingly calm, answered from inside the stall. "I've been waiting for you." Hideo's heart slammed against his ribs. His mind screamed at him to leave, but his body wouldn't move. The door to the third stall unlocked itself with a quiet click. He stood frozen in place, watching as it slowly began to creak open. Panic surged through him. Without thinking, Hideo turned and bolted for the door. His footsteps echoed loudly as he sprinted down the hall, breathless, his pulse hammering in his ears. He burst through the front doors of the school and didn't stop running until he reached his house. Safe, he told himself. He was safe now. But as he stood at the door of his own bathroom that night, he felt it again, that cold presence, watching him from the shadows. Chapter 3. Home is no safe place. Hideo sat at the edge of his bed, trying to calm his racing heart. He had been safe at home for hours now, but the feeling of being watched refused to leave him. Every time he went near the bathroom, it returned, that cold, creeping dread, as if someone or something was waiting just out of sight. The familiar comfort of his home felt like it had been hollowed out, replaced by an eerie stillness. He ran through the events in his mind, trying to rationalize them. It was just an old story, just a prank his mind was playing on him. But he couldn't forget the voice. That voice. It hadn't been in his head. It had answered him, and the stall had unlocked itself. That part he couldn't explain away. The bathroom door in the hallway creaked slightly as if the hinges were loose. Hideo glanced over at it. The lights were on inside. He hadn't turned them on. Slowly, he got up, his feet dragging, but his legs felt heavy with reluctance. Each step toward the bathroom made his skin prickle with unease. When he reached the door, his hand hovered over the handle. The light flickered inside, casting quick shadows along the walls. He swallowed hard and turned the knob. The bathroom was empty. Of course it was. Yet, something didn't feel right. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house, like the atmosphere had shifted. The mirror was fogged over, though he hadn't showered in hours. That's when he saw it, the faint outline of a handprint on the glass. Hideo stepped back, his mind racing. No one else had been in the bathroom. He rubbed his eyes, trying to convince himself that it was just condensation, nothing more. But in his heart, he knew better. From then on, every time he entered the bathroom, whether at home, at school, or even in public, he felt her presence. It was like she had latched onto him, following him wherever he went. The whispers began slowly, soft enough that he could ignore them at first, but soon they became clearer. Still waiting. And then there were the taps, the constant rhythmic dripping that seemed to follow him from place to place. It filled his ears in the quiet moments, a reminder that she was there, watching, waiting. Hideo avoided the bathroom as much as possible, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the sense that she was always near, lurking just behind the door. Chapter 4. The Spirit Invades. The knocking started that night. Hideo had managed to avoid the bathroom as much as possible, but there were moments he couldn't help it. He had to face it sooner or later, even if it was just to brush his teeth or splash water on his face. But each time he walked past, a cold sense of dread filled the hallway. That night, as he sat in his room, staring blankly at his homework, he heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A soft, deliberate knock coming from inside the bathroom. He froze, his pencil slipping from his fingers and rolling off the desk. The knock came again, a little louder this time, as if daring him to come closer. His mouth went dry. It had to be a coincidence, something explainable. But deep down, Hideo knew there was no one else in the house. His mother wouldn't be home until late, and he was alone. The knock repeated, 3 times now. His mind raced, trying to find a reason not to investigate, but curiosity or fear drove him forward. Each step down the hall felt heavier than the last. He stood in front of the bathroom door, his hand trembling as it reached for the knob. Just as he touched it, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, thick and pressing, like the air was waiting for something to happen. Hideo pushed the door open slowly. The bathroom was just as he'd left it, quiet, cold, and perfectly still. He let out a shaky breath, relieved that nothing seemed out of place, but the relief was short-lived. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye in the mirror. There, behind him, just out of focus, was a figure, a girl. Her long black hair covered most of her face, but her cold, pale hand rested against the stall door, fingers curling around the edge, as if ready to step forward. Hideo stumbled backward, knocking into the counter. He blinked, and she was gone. The bathroom was empty again, but the sense of dread remained, stronger now than ever. The spirit wasn't just haunting the school anymore. It had followed him home. The next day, at school, the same knocking echoed in the bathrooms. No matter where he went, there it was, soft, insistent, and relentless. The girl's presence clung to him like a shadow, lurking in every reflection, every flicker of light. The fear was growing, suffocating, and there was no escaping it. He tried to tell his friends, but they only laughed, dismissing it as another ghost story. Even his mother brushed it off when he mentioned it. But Hideo knew the truth. Hanako-san was real, and she wasn't bound by school walls anymore. Chapter 5. Descent into Madness. Hideo hadn't slept in days. The constant knocking, the flickering lights, the glimpses of her face in the mirrors, it was too much. He could feel his grip on reality slipping. His hands trembled as he turned the pages of his notebook, trying to focus on his schoolwork. But no matter how hard he tried, all he could hear was the sound of the dripping faucet. Always dripping, always just out of reach. The other students were starting to notice. His friends had pulled away, whispering behind his back. They thought he was losing it, and maybe he was. He had tried to tell them about Hanako-san, but no one believed him. He couldn't blame them. He wouldn't believe it either if it hadn't been happening to him. One night, driven by desperation, Hideo began researching. He spent hours poring over old books, forums, and stories about Hanako-san, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. And then he found it. Buried in a long-forgotten thread on a paranormal site, he read that Hanako-san wasn't confined to schools. She could follow her victims wherever they went. There were even stories of people who had seen her in their homes, their workplaces, their dreams. Hideo's blood ran cold. It was happening to him. The nightmares were the worst part. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the bathroom. The stalls were endless, stretching out in every direction, the doors swinging open and closed on their own. And there she was, standing just beyond the third stall, her eyes locked onto his. He could never escape her gaze. One night, after yet another nightmare, Hideo snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. His mind raced with panic, and he stormed into the bathroom, flipping the light switch on and off in rapid succession, shouting at the mirror. "Leave me alone," he screamed. "You're not real. You're just a story." But as the light flickered one last time, the reflection that stared back at him wasn't his own. It was her. Hanako-san, standing in the third stall, smiling. He stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest, but the reflection didn't disappear. It stayed there, watching him, waiting. Hideo ran to his mother, breathless, desperate for her to believe him. But she just looked at him with worried eyes, telling him he needed rest, that it was all in his head. She couldn't see what he saw. She couldn't hear what he heard. Hideo was alone. Chapter 6. The vanishing Hideo's world had shrunk to one terrible truth. There was no escape. The spirit was everywhere now. No matter where he turned, Hanako-san was there. In the mirrors, in the dark corners of his room, even in the reflection of his computer screen. She was watching, always watching. His mother was worried, of course. She had noticed how distant he had become, how his hands trembled when he passed the bathroom, how he jumped at every little sound. He hadn't eaten in days, barely slept. Every time she asked him what was wrong, he only shook his head. He couldn't explain it. She wouldn't believe him. That night, she came home late, the house eerily quiet. Hideo wasn't in his room. The bed was unmade, his clothes scattered on the floor. She called for him, her voice echoing through the empty halls, but there was no response. Her heart began to race, a mother's instinct telling her something was very wrong. She walked through the house, checking each room, growing more frantic by the minute. Then she heard it, a faint sound coming from the bathroom, a soft, rhythmic knock 3 times in a row. Her stomach churned with unease as she approached the door. "Hideo?" she called out, her voice shaky. "Are you in there?" No answer, only silence. She knocked gently, pressing her ear against the door, hoping to hear her son's voice. But instead, she heard something else, a terrified, gasping whisper. "Help! Me!" It was Hideo's voice, but it was faint, distant, as if he were trapped somewhere far away. Panic surged through her, and she grabbed the door handle, twisting it hard. The door swung open, and the sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. The bathroom was empty. No Hideo, no sign of struggle. Nothing. Just the dim flickering of the light above and the soft drip of the faucet. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate to find some clue, some explanation. Then she saw it. In the mirror, for just a split second, she caught a glimpse of her son's face, his eyes wide with fear. He was standing in the 3rd stall, his hands pressed against the glass, as though he were trapped on the other side. But when she blinked, the reflection was gone. Frantically, she searched the bathroom, calling his name, but Hideo had vanished. All that remained was the chilling silence and the faint scent of cold air. As she turned to leave, her heart pounding in her chest, there was one final sound. 3 soft knocks coming from the other side of the bathroom stall.